Good morning. We're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. And remember, as we look at it, we're looking at what the greatest teacher that ever lived is telling you and giving you the best information on what he deems to be the most important matters in human existence. When we talk about the Sermon on the Mount, that's what we're talking about. With that in mind, listen to as we begin to work through the subjects of the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5, we begin in verse 21 and 22. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. When you read that, you should be startled, because Jesus is making clear that you've heard that it was said. Now, when he says that, he'll be quoting the Old Testament sometimes, referring to the Old Testament, or he'll be referring to the Pharisaical teaching that went further than the Old Testament sometimes. Here, we know the Old Testament says, thou shalt not murder. And he says, you've heard that. Let me tell you something. Let's push behind it to the spirit of it. You should not even be angry at your brother, at your sister, at your friend, at your neighbor, at your coworker. Because if you do, he says, you'll be liable for judgment. He uses something that they would be familiar with, brought up in front of the council. You'll be in danger of the fire of hell. Think about that. How serious is anger? And yet we play around with it a bit, don't we? Here's what I want you to, I just want to get in your head as we begin and think about anger for a couple of days in regard to Jesus' teaching. One thought this morning. If you cultivate anger in your life, you will not in the moment be able to stem the tide of your character. Let me say that again. In the moment, you will not be able to stem the tide of your character if you've cultivated being an angry kind of person when situations emerge, when people don't do what you want, when the magma gets sort of stabbed down through the crust of your life. You will not be able to not get angry. And we have to recognize this. We have to recognize that what pushes behind things like atrocities like murder is an angry spirit, and you have sinned as you hold on to that anger. Now, immediately when I say that, we think, well, wait a minute, Brian, the Bible says in your anger don't sin, so you can be righteously angry. Yes, you can, but it is exceedingly rare. You're righteously angry when you are angry genuinely because God's glory is at stake in a given situation. And you have to be honest. How many times has that really been the case when you've been angry? Not very often. We're usually angry because even if God's glory is at stake in the situation, it's because my agenda has been interrupted. What I want to do, I can't do, or I don't like what's happening because of how it makes me feel. We need to deal seriously with anger. And I want you to prayerfully consider the next couple of days of these thoughts for the days as we think about anger a little more deeply. May the Lord bless you as you seek to cultivate a spirit that is not given to anger.